There's a moment, just before you walk into an event you're dreading, where you wonder if turning around and disappearing would be the braver choice. That moment had lasted nearly 2 days for me. I stood in front of the mirror in my Seattle apartment, hair pinned back, navy dress steamed to perfection, expression neutral, but inside everything was tangled. I had spent over an hour rehearsing a speech I wasn't even sure I'd deliver. A few polite words, a safe toast, something brief, vague, forgettable. Because that's how I'd survived most of my life. Being forgettable. Behind me, resting on the edge of my dresser, was a small box. Wrapped in storm blue paper with a silver ribbon. Understated. Elegant. Like me, it didn't ask for attention. But it had weight. Inside was something I hadn't touched in years. Something that had once meant everything. Now, it just sat there, like a question I hadn't answered yet. I wasn't sure if I'd bring it. I wasn't sure I should have wrapped it in the first place. I'm Harper Bennett, 34, Systems Director at Orion Research Institute. I help design spacecraft components that most people will never see and wouldn't understand if they did. I speak fluent mathematics, think in schematics, and build machines meant to survive the cold silence of deep space. But somehow I could never build a relationship with the man who raised me. My father, Richard Bennett, was retiring after 42 years as CEO of a private defense and aerospace firm in Charleston, South Carolina. He'd started there fresh out of the Navy, worked his way from junior engineer to executive kingpin, and built a career so airtight it left no room for vulnerability. Or for me. The invitation came in gold foil, formal, gala attire, black tie. I almost laughed when I read the RSVP line. Family and close colleagues encouraged to give short remarks, encouraged, as if I were ever encouraged in his world. Growing up in the Bennett house meant tight collars and tighter expectations. Brandon and Kyle, my brothers, were the golden sons, military-bound, medal-earning, legacy-affirming boys. Brandon joined the Marines right out of high school. Kyle followed into military engineering like it was a sacred right. My father beamed every time he mentioned them, as if their accomplishments were badges he'd earned himself. Then there was me. I was the girl who built cardboard satellites in the garage and snuck physics journals under her pillow. I once welded a model lunar lander from soda cans and wire hangers at 12. My mom clapped. My father asked if I'd stolen the tools. He never said I wasn't enough. He didn't need to. It was in the way he introduced me at dinner parties, if he introduced me at all. That's Harper. She's creative. Creative, as if curiosity were a flaw. I earned my degree from MIT in aerospace systems, summa cum laude, while working 2 campus jobs. No one came to graduation. I got a text from my dad 3 days later. Congrats. Didn't realize it was this week. He never visited my lab, never asked about my research. He couldn't understand my career, so he discounted it. Space is for dreamers, he once said. We build things that keep people safe here on Earth. Maybe that was his way of dismissing what he didn't control. I had spent years in orbit around his approval, hoping for even the faintest signal. And yet, like a broken satellite, I always came back empty-handed. I wasn't even sure why I was going to the gala. I told myself it was for closure, that I'd sit quietly, toast politely, and leave early. But if I was honest, part of me still carried that old ache, that embarrassing hope that maybe, finally, he'd see me. And that box on my dresser. That was my insurance. A symbol of the one time he had seen me, even if he didn't remember it. I glanced at the clock. My flight was in 2 hours. My suitcase sat zipped by the door. Navy dress packed. Heels. A speech on hotel letterhead I'd probably crumple. And that box. Still undecided. I reached for it. It fit perfectly in my palm. The weight of it felt heavier than the object inside. Maybe it was the years behind it. Or maybe it was the version of me that had wrapped it so carefully, like it still mattered what he thought. I sat on the bed, box in hand, and whispered to no one. What am I even doing? The room didn't answer, but I knew. Some part of me still believed that if I showed up, looked the part, said the right words, maybe I could rewrite the ending. Not for him. For me. Because what I needed wasn't his validation. It was permission to stop chasing it. I slipped the box into my carry-on. Not as a gift, as a question. Let him open it. Let him wonder. Or not. That part wasn't mine to control anymore. All I could control was the fact that this time I was showing up. Not as the forgotten daughter. Not as the quiet one. Not as the polite apology in heels. But as the woman who had built rockets when no one clapped. Who kept going when no one watched. I took one last look in the mirror. No more rehearsals. Let him have his gala. I had something better. A truth he couldn't ignore. And a box I maybe shouldn't have wrapped, but absolutely needed to bring. Charleston, in early spring, smelled like old magnolia and memory. The cab from the airport wound through the familiar streets of my childhood, each turn brushing past houses I once knew by porch swing and Christmas lights. The Bennett estate loomed just off Broad Street. Red brick, black shutters, front lawn trimmed with military precision. It looked the same as it always had, which somehow made it feel more distant. Like a set piece frozen in time. I didn't stay there, of course. I booked a suite downtown under my work email, avoiding the inevitable suggestion from my mother that I just come home. That house hadn't felt like home since I was 15. The evening of the gala came quicker than I expected. I arrived 20 minutes early, a habit formed by anxiety and overachievement. The Hilton's event wing was already buzzing. Valets in white gloves, photographers stationed near the step-and-repeat backdrop that screamed corporate legacy in gold serif font. I stepped out of the town car in a slate blue gown, sleek, understated, professional. I wasn't here to impress anyone, just to finish something. Inside the ballroom, round tables were dressed in linen and cold elegance. The centerpieces were towering arrangements of white lilies and cauliflowers, beautiful, impersonal, like something you'd see at a memorial. Waiters floated by like shadows, balancing trays of champagne and canapé. And at the far end, on a massive LED screen, my father's face looped in grayscale. The slideshow had already begun. Clips and stills, from the past 4 decades played in a seamless reel. My father shaking hands with generals. My father pointing to technical drawings. My father receiving medals. Posing with flight crews. Standing beside rocket prototypes with his arms folded like a commander in a war that never ended. There were no family photos. No Christmas trees. No birthday candles. No beach vacations or graduations. Not one. It was like we'd never existed. I stood at the edge of the room, invisible. As usual. Then, from my left, look who finally made it. Brandon. Always the first to greet me with a politician's handshake disguised as a hug. His cologne hit before he did. Tailored charcoal suit. That grin he'd perfected for LinkedIn. Harper, he said, squeezing my shoulder. Still in California? Seattle now, I corrected, keeping my tone light. Still with Orion Research. Right, the telescope people. Before I could respond, Kyle appeared. Taller than I remembered. Same square jaw as Dad. Harper, he said with a nod, adjusting his cuffs. You're still in, space stuff, yeah? I gave a small smile. Aerospace systems. Mostly deep space telemetry and risk modeling these days. Brandon chuckled. Sounds like science club. Kyle laughed, not maliciously, just dismissively. Like they were poking fun at the quirky sibling who still played with stars while they built things that mattered. Well, I said, tone steady. We did help navigate a satellite through the heliopause last quarter. Not bad for a club. They blinked, smiled, moved on. And just like that, I was 13 again, at the dinner table explaining orbital velocity while they debated football scores, talking to a room that clapped for silence. I slipped away to the edge of the room, took a flute of champagne from a tray, and let my eyes wander. My father stood near the stage, tall and poised in a deep navy tuxedo. Laughing with executives, his hand gestures were wide and confident. His kingdom surrounded him, men in medals, women in pearls. I watched him scan the room. He looked at Brandon, clapped a hand on Kyle's shoulder, shared a knowing smile with one of his old Navy friends. He looked at my mother, Elaine, who stood with a quiet poise near the coat check, nodding gently at a passing guest. But he didn't look at me. Not once. I considered leaving. My heels already ached, my throat tightening under the collar of forced composure. Then, Harper, my mother. She reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. Her dress was olive green, elegant and understated, like she had dressed to disappear. "I'm glad you came," she said, voice soft as always. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I know," she said, looking toward the slideshow. "But he'll say something. I believe he will. He has to." I wanted to believe her. But then another image flashed across the screen. Richard Bennett, standing on the deck of an aircraft carrier. Alone. Commanding. Smiling. Always smiling. I turned to my mother. "He's rewritten the whole story," I said quietly. "We weren't even extras." She didn't deny it, just lowered her eyes. "You deserve to be here," she whispered. "You always have." And yet, I had never been part of his legacy reel. Not in photo, not in memory, not in mention. I exhaled through my nose, steel rising in my spine. If I was going to be ignored again, it would be while standing tall, not shrinking. I scanned the room for the gift box, still in my clutch, still unopened, still waiting. My mother touched my elbow one last time. "Whatever happens tonight," she said, "just remember. He sees more than he says. He's just Richard." That was always the excuse. "He's just Richard." As if emotional absence was a personality trait. I didn't reply, because I wasn't here for him. Not anymore. I was here to bury the last bit of hope I still stupidly carried, and I had the box to prove it. The lights dimmed slowly. Stage drama on a corporate budget. A hush fell over the room, the kind that vibrates with anticipatory respect. People shifted in their seats. Forks clinked softly against dessert plates. At our table near the rear, I sat straight-backed, hands folded in my lap, the navy clutch resting beside my champagne flute like a coiled secret. At the front of the ballroom, the MC, a thin man in a tux 2 shades too shiny, took the stage, with practiced ease. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice full of reverence, "tonight we celebrate a titan in the aerospace and defense industry, a man who has led with vision, tenacity, and honor for over 4 decades. Please welcome Richard Bennett." The applause exploded like cannon fire. People stood, some whistled, others clapped with both palms and pride. I didn't stand. Not out of spite, out of stillness, out of observation. I watched him walk onto that stage the way he'd always entered rooms, with certainty, like the air itself adjusted to accommodate him. His tux fit like it had been tailored to his legacy. He waved, nodded, paused just long enough for the audience to drink it in. "Thank you," he said, once the clapping had settled into silence. "Thank you all for being here. It means more than I can say." He launched into a story. His first day at the firm, back when it was still housed in a converted hangar near the old Navy Yard. He spoke about designs drawn by hand, mistakes, made and learned from. Late nights turned into breakthroughs. The crowd laughed in all the right places, nodded when he listed off achievements. The slideshow behind him rolled on. Young Richard in uniform, mid-career Richard in boardrooms, older Richard at launch sites and ribbon cuttings. I sipped my champagne, barely tasting it. Then his tone shifted, softened. I couldn't have done any of this, he said, without the foundation I had at home. I sat up straighter. He smiled. My wife, Elaine. He gestured to my mother, who lowered her eyes modestly. The quiet force behind everything I've built. And of course, my sons. Applause again. Brandon and Kyle beamed. My mother clapped gently. Brandon, my father continued. Marine captain, fierce and focused. Kyle, head of our strategic testing division. Brilliant, relentless. They're not just my legacy. They're my proof that the future is in strong hands. He looked toward them, as if passing a torch with his eyes. They've honored our name. They've carried it forward, with strength, discipline, and purpose. More applause. Then he paused, looked down briefly at the podium, smoothed his notes. And of course, he said, tone cooler, not every child follows the same path. A small silence. He didn't look at me. Some are dreamers. Some take a different route. That's all right. Every family has its spectrum. Not everyone is cut from the same cloth, and that's okay. The room didn't gasp, didn't shift, but I did. Internally. My spine stayed straight, my face unreadable, but something inside me had frozen over. The words weren't loud. They weren't cruel on the surface. But they carried the same blade they always had. Disappointment dressed in politeness. Disapproval wrapped in performance. Not everyone has what it takes. He didn't say my name, but he might as well have. The implication floated like ash through the room. The daughter who doesn't belong. The one who chose stars over steel, equations over orders. The one who never fit. A soft ripple of laughter followed. Small, tight, polite. My hands trembled just slightly under the table. And then I stood. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just deliberately. Brandon turned toward me, confusion in his eyes. Kyle glanced up, a flicker of discomfort there. My mother, God bless her, didn't try to stop me. I walked the aisle slowly, each step echoing, faintly on the polished ballroom floor. Every head turned, every conversation paused. The room, for the first time in my entire life, was watching me. But I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. I was done. I didn't climb the stage. I stopped just at the edge, close enough for him to see me, but far enough to remind him this was not his stage anymore. He looked down, startled, the applause faltering as the crowd grew unsure. From my clutch, I withdrew the box, wrapped in storm blue paper, silver ribbon still crisp. I held it in both hands, offered it upward with calm precision. For you, I said. My voice was steady, clear, cold. From your biggest disappointment. A pause so long you could hear the air breathing. Enjoy your retirement. I placed the box gently on the podium. And then I turned. He didn't reach for me. Didn't call after me. Didn't follow. My heels clicked like punctuation marks as I walked down that long aisle. No slouch in my posture. No apology in my stride. I didn't cry. I didn't run. I walked. All the way out of the ballroom. All the way out of the legacy he'd tried to write without me. I didn't go back to the hotel room right away. Instead, I drove to the farthest corner of the Hilton parking garage, turned, off the engine, and just sat there in the dim, fluorescent quiet. The only sound was the soft tick of cooling metal under the hood and the occasional whoosh of tires on wet pavement outside. Charleston rain had started sometime during the speeches. Somehow that felt appropriate. My hands were still on the steering wheel, knuckles tight. Not from fear. Not anymore. From something slower, colder. Like walking through a snowstorm you saw coming and finally stopped trying to outrun. The box was gone, left at the podium. I imagined it sitting there, untouched, like an unopened truth in the middle of a lie. Knowing my father, he wouldn't open it in front of the guests. Too composed for that. Too calculated. But curiosity was his oldest vice. That I could count on. It would take him less than 10 minutes. Maybe 5. I pictured it. Him back in the green room, fingers tugging loose the silver ribbon, folding back the navy paper with that same clinical precision he used to use with blueprints and contracts. And then he'd see it. The photo. Just one. Small. Framed in brushed steel. The kind you'd keep on a desk if you actually wanted to remember something. We were at a regional science fair. I was 12. I had built a model of the International Space Station out of soda cans, wire hangers, and about 50 glue sticks. I still remembered the smell of solder and the burn on my thumb that blistered for a week. He hadn't wanted to. Come. He'd said it conflicted with some early morning call, and besides, those things were participation trophy nonsense. But my mother had made him. Practically dragged him out the door in slacks and a polo shirt, his discomfort visible, from a mile away. But then, I won. First place. District-wide. And for 5 whole minutes. Just 5. He looked proud. Someone in the crowd snapped a photo at exactly the right moment. His hand on my shoulder, my ribbon clutched in both fists, the glimmer of a smile on his face that wasn't the clipped corporate smirk he wore for clients and quarterly reports. It was real. I'd kept the photo hidden in a file folder for over 20 years, the edges soft with time, waiting for the right moment. Waiting for some part of me to believe it still meant something. Tonight, I finally let it go. But not without context. Tucked beneath the photo, written in clean black ink on a simple card, were 14 words. This was the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I'm done now. That was it. No drama, no rage, just the truth. Packaged in a box that looked polite enough to pass for a gift. I didn't need him to open it right away. I just needed him to know that the daughter he kept overlooking remembered everything. A light buzz came from the clutch on the passenger seat, my phone. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. I finally reached for it, the screen glowing with unread messages. The first was from my mother. Are you okay? Then one from Sophia, my closest friend back in Seattle. Please tell me you didn't actually say that. Followed by another, wait. No, tell me you did. A message from Kyle. That was a real low blow, Harper. One from Brandon. What the hell is wrong with you? And then, from him. My father. Just 2 words. We need to talk. No punctuation, no warmth, no apology, just 5 syllables that sounded less like concern and more like a summons. I set the phone, down on the center console without replying. Not out of spite. Not out of rebellion. Because I didn't need to. The room had already heard what I had to say. He had heard what I had to say. I leaned back against the headrest, letting the silence stretch until it wrapped around me like armor. I thought I'd cry. Honestly, I expected it. For years I'd rehearsed this confrontation in my mind, imagining the release that would follow, the sobs, the collapse, the catharsis. But all I felt was quiet, not numbness. Freedom. A strange, deliberate, calm, like the moment you stop trying to climb a mountain and finally accept that the summit was never real, just a painted wall, beautiful from a distance, hollow up close. I stared out the windshield, rain tracing slow rivers down the glass. Somewhere inside that ballroom, Richard Bennett was holding a box he didn't expect, and a memory he probably didn't want. But he'd opened it. He'd seen it, and no matter what came next, he couldn't unsee it. The girl in the photo wasn't lost. She'd simply stopped waiting. It was dusk when I pulled into the circular drive of the Bennett house. The brick looked darker than I remembered. The porch light was already on. Automatic, unchanged, like muscle memory embedded into the bones of the house. I parked near the hedge, shut off the engine, and sat for a long moment, fingers gripping the steering wheel like I was about to launch into orbit. I hadn't called. He hadn't either. But his text, "We need to talk," still sat on my phone like a stone. And I knew I wouldn't be able to let it go until I answered it. I grabbed my keys, stepped out into the humid evening, and walked up the path. The door was unlocked. It always had been. A strange family ritual. We never talked about feelings, but the house was always open. Inside, the air smelled like lemon polish and old carpet. My mother's touch. She'd probably been up since dawn, scrubbing baseboards and pretending nothing had happened. I found him in the den, same room he'd held court in since I was a child. Same leather chair, the kind that looked too stiff to be comfortable. The television was off. A glass of something amber rested on the side table, and in his lap, he held the photo. It wasn't in the frame anymore. He'd taken it out. The paper was curled slightly at the edges, like it had been held for too long, fingers running over faces long forgotten. He didn't look up when I entered. Didn't speak. Neither did I. I stepped forward slowly, the floorboards groaning beneath my heels, and sat on the edge of the old floral sofa across from him. For a long time, we just sat like that. A still life. Then, finally, "I don't remember this day," he said. His voice was quieter than I expected. Not weak. Just tired. "Of course you don't," I said softly. "It wasn't important to you." That made him flinch. Subtle, but there. He placed the photo gently on the table between us. "You were what, 12? "Yeah," I said. "Regional science fair. I built the space station out of cans and coat hangers. Won first place." He nodded once, eyes locked on the image. "I didn't want to go." "I know. Your mother made me." "I know that too." Another pause. "You looked proud," I said, motioning toward the photo. Just for a second, someone caught it on film. He didn't deny it. Just sat back and let out a long, measured breath. "You think I never cared about you," he said finally. "That I only ever saw the boys." "I don't think it," I replied, folding my hands in my lap. "I lived it." He rubbed his thumb against the rim of his glass. "I pushed you because I saw something in you. Something sharp, unrelenting." I shook my head. "No, you didn't push me. You pushed me away." He looked at me then. Really looked. Not the polite nod at holidays. Not the distracted glance from across the room. He saw me. "You weren't like them," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "I wasn't. You didn't seek approval. You challenged it. And that made me unworthy of respect?" He didn't answer, but his silence spoke. After a beat, he said, "You reminded me of my father." That caught me off guard. I blinked. "What?" He leaned forward, elbows on knees. He hated when I questioned things. Hated that I didn't want to stay on the farm or enlist straight out of school. He thought I was soft. Thought I was selfish for wanting more. I had never heard him speak about his father like this. I'd barely heard him speak about him at all. He died thinking I'd failed him, he said, voice brittle. Never once said he was proud. "So you did the same to me," I said. You passed it down. I didn't mean to. But you did. He exhaled again, jaw tightening. You know, I said, my voice steadier now. I spent 20 years chasing that version of you, the one in the photo, the one who looked at me like I mattered. He closed his eyes briefly. I didn't know how to raise a daughter like you. You didn't try. He winced. I wasn't asking for affection, I continued, or approval, just acknowledgement. Another silence. He picked up the photo again, held it at an angle, like he was trying to see something he'd missed the first time. You scared me, he said at last. That stopped me. What? You were different, too smart, too independent. You didn't want my guidance, you didn't need it. I stared at him. So you punished me for that? I didn't know what else to do. That's not good enough, I said, not cruelly, just truthfully. I know. There it was, not an apology, not really, but something that hovered near it, a crack in the concrete wall. He looked up. His eyes, usually steel, were softer now, wrinkled, human. I see you now, he said. That shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have been enough. But in a way it was. Because for the first time, I realized something simple and devastating. His approval was never mine to earn. He wasn't withholding it because I lacked something. He was withholding it because he did. And that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I leaned back against the couch, suddenly exhausted. I don't need anything. From you, I said. Not now, he nodded. I know. We sat like that for a few more minutes. Not speaking, not fixing anything, just existing in the same room, the way we never had before. Eventually, I stood. I should go. He rose as well, but didn't follow me to the door. Didn't offer a hug or a handshake. Just stood there with the photo in his hand and something almost like understanding on his face. I paused in the doorway, turned back once. I hope you keep it, I said. I will. I believed him. And when I stepped outside, the night air didn't feel so heavy anymore. The porch light stayed on behind me. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into the dark. I was walking toward something new. Myself. I returned to Seattle on a Sunday morning. The city welcomed me with overcast skies and the quiet hum of early joggers along the waterfront. As the plane descended, I looked out the window and felt, strangely, still. Not numb, not empty, just still. Like my body had finally caught up to a truth I'd been circling for years. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't carrying anything. Not the hope of being seen. Not the weight of being invisible. Not the quiet ache for an apology I was never going to get, just me. My apartment was just as I'd left it. Neat, minimal, grounded. I unpacked slowly, placing things where they belonged. My toothbrush, my keys, my clutch, now just a clutch again. No blue box inside. No secrets wrapped in ribbon. I slept for 9 hours that night. No dreams. No spiraling thoughts. Just sleep. On Monday morning, I returned to Orion Research Institute, like I hadn't just detonated a decades-long performance in the middle of a Charleston ballroom. The lab was buzzing. The new satellite array project was in full swing, tracking anomalies. In deep space radiation patterns, I slid into the rhythm easily. Schematics, briefings, whiteboard equations, my world, my language. No one asked about the gala. No one brought up the photo or the box or the video that, by then, had already made its rounds on social media. But they had seen it. You can always tell by the way people look at you when they think they know something you haven't said out loud. I didn't care. I wasn't embarrassed. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let them see me. 2 days after I returned, my division head knocked on the glass outside my office door. Lisa Chang, head of engineering initiatives. Brilliant. Respected. Direct to a fault. "You're still good for the STEM Summit keynote next month?" she asked, stepping inside. I blinked, remembering vaguely that I'd agreed to it weeks earlier. "The one in Boston?" I asked. She nodded. "You'll be the first female lead from Orion to speak in nearly a decade. The organizers want your personal story woven in, background, challenges, that sort of thing. Especially given—" She trailed off, gesturing vaguely in the direction of the internet. I nodded slowly. "I'm in." She gave me a look, half skeptical, half supportive. "You sure?" "I am," I said. "Completely." And I was. That night I sat on my balcony, laptop open, city lights glittering below like a constellation designed by humans who still believed in possibilities. I stared at the blinking cursor on a blank document for a long time. Then I typed the first line. Sometimes, the greatest fuel for a rocket isn't fire, it's rejection. The words flowed easily after that. Not because it was easy, but because it was true. I told the story I had once been ashamed to tell. Not the gala, not the confrontation. The other story. The quieter one. About growing up in a house where brilliance only had value if it wore a uniform. About how being a daughter meant being doubted. About how you can build engines for outer space, but still be invisible at your own dinner table. About how painful it is to be dismissed by the people who built you, and how powerful it is when you stop needing their blueprint to build yourself. I didn't write for applause. I wrote for the girl I used to be, and for the girls coming next. The video of the keynote went viral within a week, not because I cried or raged or threw someone under a bus, because I told the truth. You are not required to prove your worth to people who refuse to see you, I had said, voice steady, hands open. Some legacies are worth breaking. Some names are worth rebuilding. And sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is stop shrinking. A few days after the video went live, I received a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Elena Carter. My cousin, my father's sister's daughter. We'd met maybe twice in childhood. Weddings, funerals, the usual obligatory functions. She was a soft-voiced girl who always stood on the edge of rooms, like she was apologizing for taking up space. Her message read, "I read your story." I cried. You probably don't know this, but my dad treated me the same way. Always said boys were the future, girls were decoration. I wish I'd had the courage to do what you did. Thank you for showing me it's not too late to rewrite the story. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote back just one sentence. It's never too late to stop shrinking. That's what no one tells you. Not in textbooks. Not in corporate handbooks. Not in family stories. That healing doesn't arrive like a trumpet blast. It doesn't walk in wearing a crown and a grand announcement. It shows up in quiet choices. Turning. Off the phone when the messages get too loud. Saying no when silence used to be easier. Telling the truth out loud when your whole life trained you to whisper. Piece by piece, it lifts. Not all at once. Not cleanly, but steadily. That's how it felt. Now, like gravity had loosened. Like I no longer had to carry everyone's expectations on my shoulders to feel like I belonged. I had built a career out of launch math and flight risk. But this was the first time I'd felt truly weightless. 3 months after the Charleston Gala, I opened my inbox to find a message with the subject line, Feature Profile Request, the failure who made it. At first, I thought it was a joke, a spam trap, something cruel masked in clickbait. But it wasn't. It was from a journalist named Ava Kendall, a writer for the Chronicle of Women in STEM. She had seen my keynote at the Boston Summit and followed the viral clip from the retirement party. A quiet moment now dissected, captioned, and reshared across dozens of platforms. Her message was direct, respectful, and honest. We want to write not just about that night, but about the cost of being overlooked, the journey of resilience, and what it means to become visible after years of silence. Would you be open to talking? I sat with the email for 2 days before I responded. I kept thinking of my 12-year-old self, the girl holding a blue ribbon with glue on her fingers, her father's hand resting on her shoulder, frozen in the only frame where she was ever enough. What would she have wanted? I replied with a single word. Yes. The article was published a month later. The title sat bold and unapologetic at the top of the page. The Failure Who Made It. At first, the word failure made me flinch. Then I realized it wasn't an insult. It was a reclamation, because that's what they had called me. Not in those exact terms, maybe, but in the glances, the omissions, the weighted silences, the quiet dinner tables where my name was an afterthought. The holiday toasts where only my brothers were mentioned, the retirement speech where I was dismissed without ever being named. The piece opened with the scene from the gala, me standing at the edge of the stage, offering the box, walking away without looking back. It painted the image clearly, but with reverence, not spectacle. What mattered more was what came after. It spoke of the years in school when I hid in labs while my peers went to parties, the job rejections, the male-dominated rooms, the silence after my first paper was published, the long nights at Orion, the systems no one believed I could build until I did. It ended with the quote from my keynote: "You are not required to prove your worth to people who refuse to see you." I didn't expect the response. I didn't expect strangers to send emails telling me that they, too, had handed someone a box, real or metaphorical, and walked away. Women in tech, girls in school, mothers, granddaughters, quiet rebels, late bloomers. Everyone who'd ever been told they were too much, or not enough, or something inconvenient in between. One message, though, surprised me most. It was from my mother. Not a long email, just a simple line. I should have stepped in more. "I'm sorry." I read it 3 times before replying. "I always knew you loved me, even from the corners." Since then, we'd spoken more. Not often. Not about everything. But there was space now. Honesty. Gentle conversation. A kind of mutual softening. And then, one day a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. Postmarked from Charleston. My name written in sharp, blocky pen I recognized instantly. Inside was the photo. The same one. Me, 12. Ribbon in hand. His palm resting on my shoulder. That rare, vanished smile on his face. On the back, written, in that same steady block print, were 14 new words. I didn't forget. I just didn't know how to love that version of you. I'm sorry. No signature, no warm closing, just that. And somehow, it was enough. Because it wasn't for him anymore. It was for me. I folded the photo gently and slid it into the same drawer, where I used to keep every disappointing birthday card he'd ever given me. The ones with generic messages. The ones that arrived late or not at all. That drawer used to hurt. Now it didn't. It held history. Perspective. Sometimes apologies come when you stop needing them. A month later, I stood in the lecture hall of the University of Washington, preparing to speak on a panel for women in engineering. The students were sharp-eyed, bright-voiced, already questioning rules they'd been told to accept. I saw myself in so many of them, not just in their majors or their resumes, but in their edges, their resistance to shrinking. My turn came. At the end, I didn't read a speech. I just told the truth. About growing up in a house where ambition had gender. About watching my brothers be celebrated for simply existing while I worked twice as hard to be heard. About learning to build rockets while unlearning the lie that I needed someone else's applause to matter. and I ended with what I had come to believe with my whole self. You don't have to wait to be seen. See yourself. Choose yourself. That's where your power lives. Afterward, a girl no older than 19 came up to me, eyes wide behind round glasses. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "How did you know when it was time to stop trying to prove yourself to him?" I smiled. Not the practiced one. A real one. "I didn't," I said. "I just woke up one day and realized I already had." She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away for later. Maybe for years later. And I hoped when that moment came for her, she'd remember. That she'd choose herself. That she'd walk away, not in rage or rebellion, but in clarity. Because that's what this was. Not revenge, not bitterness, freedom. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It's not loud. It doesn't roar into your life like a savior. It's quiet. It comes on a Tuesday morning while you fold laundry and realize you're not waiting anymore. It arrives on a Sunday afternoon when your phone doesn't ring, and you're finally okay with that. It lives in your breath, in your voice, in the way you take up space without apology. They used to call me the failure. Now they just call me Harper. And I love the sound of that.